Lindsay's pointing away. It's fine to be enthusiastic, but if we try and take the little penguins over to the far away iceberg, half of them will drown. So we need no-nos around us. But the thing with the change is that this is what it looks like. 70% just fall flat in their face. 25% actually get anywhere near achieving the change and delivering the benefits. And I'd sit NPJ paralysis in that space. And only as little as 5%, just 1 in 20 projects actually meaningfully succeed. And I think what people don't always appreciate is the change is a process, it's not an event. And the reason why those two get confused is come the 1st of July, we're going to do a massive structural change. We're going to introduce Lorenzo or Cerner. We're going to introduce, and people think that therefore the change is an event driven by time, and actually not. It's about how first change happens within individuals and then organizations, if you will. First people change and then organizations change in that order. And it's very, very personal for people. Some people are really keen, they're really desperate, they want to get on with it. Other people say, oh, now you're scaring me. And more than anything, change is really about the gradual growth in feelings and skills. It's both. You can know stuff, but that's never enough. It's about how you feel about stuff. And Suzanne being here has been a nurse practitioner, and I'm sure this will also apply to any of you who've taken on advanced practice in physiotherapy, is when you go from, you've got all these years of experience and then you get this qualification as an advanced practitioner, what often happens is people's confidences collapse, partly because competence comes before confidence. Because suddenly this is my patient and I'm dealing with this patient only, it is on me, and oh my God, I've got imposter syndrome. And actually I think, Jane, the figure is closer to about 80-85%. It's wildly prevalent. And I think there's two things around imposter syndrome here in terms of making change and succeeding. Is the first is by calling a syndrome, I think what we do is pathologize it. So I'd reframe it as imposter thinking, because we can change how we think. And one way as I think about imposter syndrome as somebody who lives with it every single day is that it's my best friend. It's not my best friend. I'm not that desperate for friends, but it's a good friend to have in your house. And the reason is this: the more successful people are, the more likely they are to experience imposter syndrome thinking. And that's often what drives people, because if you reframe it as, actually, if other people believe in me, they gave me the job, and while I was thinking HR would be tapping me on the shoulder saying, sorry, it was a big mistake, you should go back to where you were. They had the faith in me. So my job now is to raise my game to fulfill the belief that others have in me, even if I don't have it in myself. And that's where we build the confidence back, and that's where the feelings and the skills come together. But we're all familiar with the change curve. This is not a specific thing, who are the most committed anti-smokers? Who are the most committed anti-smokers? And feel free to chip away in the chat, ask questions in the chat. It's never too formal, my sessions. Who are the most committed anti-smokers? Exactly, Juliet. Exactly, Becky. It's the ex. My sister gave up after she stopped for years. So none of us in the family have ever smoked. I mean, I did smolder as a teenager, but that's more than you need to know about my love life as a teenager. But she smoked and she gave up on Easter Sunday. So she has, and she'd had a word with herself, and she gave up on Easter. And like she says, I've got no desire at all to ever touch them again, which is fantastic. But when it comes to these change shows, people are like, look, I'm grand, it's good for an hour. But actually, if you think about change more generally, rather than specifically to do with smoking, look, things are fine, thanks. It's all good. We've got this. And then there's no, we do not need change. And then there's the resistance of over my dead body, at which point you think, where do we keep the shovels? And then there's maybe exploring, maybe it could work. Oh yeah, I can see how it works. And then this really goes. And have you noticed that the commitment is even higher than the satisfaction? And that's where change, but you have to, it's almost like the grief. First there's the denial, then there's the anger, then there's bargaining, and eventually, a bit of depression, and then hope, and then acceptance. And this is a classic change. And we have to spend time with people in the space they are in, Because if you want to enable successful change, you have to be go to where people are and bring them to where you want them to be, rather than telling them they need to be where you are. It's a bit like going on holidays to Spain and shouting very loudly until they understand English. It doesn't really work. So you have to start where people are in their journey. But resistance is may well be inevitable, but it's not a bad thing because if you think about it, change generates anxiety. There's the learning anxiety. I don't know anything. I'm incompetent. I don't have time. It's the cognitive load that's added because you're learning a new skill. You may not know. How many of you remember, by the way, that when you started to learn to drive and how hard it was? You got gear sticks, you got brakes, you got wind mirrors, you got mirror. It's really hard. And how many of you have driven home and not remembered the journey? So when we learn a new skill, it takes up substantial cognitive load of the frontal cortex. But as we semi-automate things, which is what we do mostly, it actually gets us calmer. We feel less anxious, and we semi-automate stuff. Tonight, have a look at what time you put your toothbrush in, because it will be the same one. When you put your shoes on tomorrow, if it's got laces, note which one you do, because we don't have to think about this stuff. There's a situational anxiety, of course, is what happens if we don't change. And people, as I've indicated from the cognitive load, people work to conserve energy or lower their anxiety. And the brain's job is not to keep us happy. The brain's job is to keep us alive. And what subconsciously is going in our brains is, listen, you made it yesterday, you stayed alive. Now do the same thing, you'll probably make it. This in part is why we lower our anxiety. This is why we are resistant. But people will choose to change the situation if they because it matters to them personally, because their colleagues who they trust take it seriously, and because quite simply because it works. And a good example of that, let me just pick out from my that's an old plug. Here's the old version. Well, these are the USB A's. As you know, there is only one way to put the USB A in. It works because there's only that, but that's the wrong way. Therefore, I have to turn it around. The beauty of the USB C, of course, is it doesn't matter what way. But when people do stuff because it works, it builds confidence, lowers, conserves energy, lowers anxiety. So it's not a bad thing. But the thing is, how intense is it? Well, first is resistance of the idea itself. And this is about a difference of opinion. And it may be because they've got wrong or missing information. They've got data that conflicts with what they thought they understood. There's, you may recall we used to talk about global warming, and then you had idiots. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You had politicians who would come into in the House of Representatives with their snowballs. And how can there be global warming when there's snowball? And the misunderstandings about, well, if I do this, what's the consequence? So there's the difference of opinion. The interesting one is more interesting one, I think, is due to embedded or deeper emotional issues. One of the things I think a lot of our medical colleagues, the PA stuff, I was having this kind of conversation with a medical colleague in the last day or two, and is for the physician associates, and some of the behavior has been not okay on Twitter. Some of the way people, the fantastic Dr. Esther Clift of this parish, she put up, got a new job in the Isle of Wight, put Dr. Esther Clift, consultant, I think it was consultant physiotherapist or something, and some people took a photograph, and then she had an enormous pile on, and the British Geriatric Society stood up behind her. I know Agile did. And my take on it, this is about some of our more junior medical colleagues feeling very undervalued, feeling very taken advantage of, very distrustful, feeling isolated. There's no incentives at the moment because they're nearly 30% down on where they should be on their income. They feel disrespected, and then there's the global stuff. So I think that's one of I think I would use that as an example. But the irony is, of course, all the medical colleagues I've spoken to, the PAs I've spoken to, they've all said the same thing, which is the PAs and the doctors want exactly the same thing. They want regulation, they want consistency, they want standards. And that's the sad bit, because then the next level of depth is the deeply embedded. And I think here it had to go for big P political. The difference, there's the historic animosity between the Republicans and the Democrats, or Labour and the Tories. It's historic. It's values based. It's completely different goals, whether it's society or individuals. There's no such thing as society. One former prime minister infamously said, and that is really hard to get past. And they've done MRI scans, and believe it or not, who was it? I know you'll all know the answer to this question. Who was it who was the guy who took off his shirt? He dumped it or jumped into a shirt in his shirt. It was one of these. Jane Austen type series. Colin Firth was going to get there in the end, and he is the co-author of a paper on doing MRI scans I think they put people in a CT, people who are very supportive of the Labour Party and supportive of the Conservative Party, and they put them in an MRI scanner, and then I think they showed a picture of Maggie Thatcher, and those of one political persuasion got very excited, and their brain all lit up with excitement, and the others, well, not so much. And why that's important is because it is so embedded; they weren't even conscious of their reactions to it. The first of these papers was done on Clinton and Reagan or something like that. And it's so deep rooted and it's so about values, the evidence will never, ever be enough. And that's the resistance. That's why we have the resistance around climate change, for example, despite all the evidence of the Anthropocenic man-made climate change or human-made climate change. That's why you still have people fighting. So it's important to notice. And one of your great big challenges, it's important to separate it out, because if you get to understand what level people are at, especially if it's levels 1 and 2, you can work on those. And then, but what is it that we normally do? Well, first of all, you're an absolute bloody idiot. What you dismiss the need, and when people are resistant by being disrespectful and dismissive, all you end up doing is getting them completely offside. Or the bulldozer, you just don't understand. You listen. Let me just shout at you in English again until you understand the language. The bulldozer effect. Let's talk. We've got merit. Let me seek to understand where your concerns are. Let me seek to understand where you're coming from and see, is there a middle way through it? And then there's the anticipate not being placed in a position of selling a proposal, but to being positioning yourself as responding to a felt need. An exercise I can often do in workshops is I get everyone to sell a pen to their neighbor. They've all got pens. So how do you sell a pen to your neighbor? And lots of people tell you it's a really good fun exercise if you're ever doing workshops. And people are busy selling and selling and selling about the features, the benefits. It writes for you. It's the equivalent of AI. It'll do all your reports. It's invisible links. All got some beautiful things. Then I asked the question: all of you were selling. How many of you asked the other person what they wanted to buy? Because the thing is, we don't like to be sold, but we do like to buy. And how many of you, and it seems to be clothes shops, I don't know what it is about clothes shop, how many of you got into a clothes shop and you're no sooner over the threshold, like, oh, can I help you? And you're thinking, do you know what? No, I think I'll just walk straight out again. If they gave you time to decide what you want to purchase, then you're more likely to buy. And so if you find yourself you are selling, actually the trick with these things is find out what their needs are. Where are they? What is their concerns? What are they? Then listening and then titrating to influence based on what their perceived need is. Because too often what we have is this culture of firefighting constantly every single day is another firefight. And we don't get time to step back. This morning I did, like I said, there's 300 nurses and midwives, including the lovely Suzanne here, at this conference paper I gave. And several people came up to me afterwards and said, what was really lovely about, I talked about the value of patients' time and deconditioning. And I tell everyone how proud I am to be the honorary president of Agile, the person that's to do that, because that means a great deal. And I say, I always say, none of our candles get dimmer when we hold our candle up to another profession. And several afterwards through the day came up and said, what was really important about what for them was the basics and remembering actually the fundamentals of what we do and why we do it. Because the one thing we all share in common, as I said to somebody, whether you're a nurse, a doctor, a therapist, a cleaner, or whatever you may be, it won't just be about doing your job. What it's about is caring for other people, trying to make a small difference to somebody's life. That's the connecting tissue between us. But when you're constantly trying to sort out discharges, you're trying to sort out referrals, you're trying to sort out, it feels like every single day is a firefight. And then how do you get the bandwidth to try and improve your service where you work? But remember this, if you're going to tell me something, I'll forget it. I'll forget it because my brain is full and my last brain rejected me. I will forget it. If you show me, I might remember. But if you involve me, then this is my project too. This is my piece of work. This is ours. I should say, by the way, that I'm really happy to send a slide deck to anyone who wants it. I'm always happy to give away stuff, by now. Now, this is my favorite, one of my very favorite slides ever that I've ever falling in love rocks. I just love that. And falling rocks. Because what's really important is if you get people to think differently, that can change their behaviors and lead to better results. And you go about that by collecting data, presenting information, changing thinking, changing behavior. The Australians were always brilliant at this stuff. So they, for example, put, the images of a number of the 400 chemicals that are in cigarettes. So there's arsenic, there's road tar, there is copper, there is all sorts of deadliness, And for a number of Aussies, when they did this, I think it was the early 90s, quite a few Aussies thought, oh my God, I had no idea that this is in cigarettes. And that data, that information was enough to help them to change their behavior. They showed the images, quite graphic images of children and all sorts of stuff, people with mouth cancer. One of my first time I ever went to Aussie was in 98, and it was before or after the Melbourne Grand Prix. And I loved one of the stands it said, which is one of their campaigns about drink driving. It says, if you drink and drive, you're a bloody idiot. And I think only in Aussie would they go that far. I love them for it. But it's more than about thinking. You get people to feel differently. That can change behavior and lead to even better results. And if you create compelling, surprising experiences, not only will the feelings change, but the significant behavior changes. And there's a fantastic book called it'll come to me in a minute. Stick, make it stick. And he gives an example of an intern, nothing to do with healthcare, by the way. This intern was asked to find out all the different types of gloves this company is using. And what a traditional intern could easily have done is contacted all the divisions, asked them for all the different types of gloves they use, the manufacturers and the costs of it, and produced a spreadsheet. It would have gone to the board and they'd say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Anyway, we've got a lot of other things going on. So somebody can pick that up. But instead, what he did is he asked every division to send a pair of the gloves that they were using and all the different types of gloves they were using. And then what he did is he brought them into the boardroom and put a pair of each of these different types of gloves all around. In fact, subsequently, the boardroom became known as the glove room because there was heaps and heaps and heaps of gloves. But what he also did is he put a little sticky label about the price of each of those gloves. And in different divisions, and the same manufacturers were sending different prices of gloves, of the same gloves, to this company. And can you imagine how people would react and say, hang on, they're charging us $3 for this division, and they're charging us $7 for the exactly same glove from the same company. So can you imagine, how you would feel? Like you feel ripped off, you feel cross, and you say, right, we have to get this sorted out. So when you get people to feel, has an even more powerful impact. And successful change is 80% leadership, it's establishing direction, it's aligning, motivating, inspiring, and 20% is planning, logistics, budget, Gantt charts, problem solving. And too often, most of the change efforts, percentages are the opposite way around. And we've all had the experience of being involved in, there's been projects and they've had them working on them for 6 months, they've had meetings and project meetings and Gantt charts and spreadsheets, and then they launch it with a big fuss in the morning, and by the end of the morning, the dog on the street can tell you it's not going to work. But people by then put their time, their effort, their energy, and their ego, and they keep going, and get surprised when it fails. I'm going to skip past these for time. I think most of you will have seen the deity conditioning video, and I think this is if you haven't and you want to see it, please do. You're very welcome to. But I just noticed the time it's 1 minute past 8. But there's a question I think in terms of success, and it's this, which is the patient safe for admission is sometimes a better question than is the patient safe for discharge? Because it is very easy to admit. It's very easy to get them in. It's the line of least resistance. What is hard is getting people out again. So if we can stop them coming in, that's why it's such an important thing that we should have therapists and nurses, community therapists and nurses, pharmacists in the emergency department, district nurses in the emergency department as hostage prevention experts, and they're rescuing patients out of places. That's how we keep people safer, I think, at times. But it ties into this thing about falls. And again, I spoke about this today. Too often we have uh, falls practitioners, we've got falls prevention service, we've got falls, and we keep people in beds because we think there's a risk that they will fall if they let them out of bed. But actually, it's not about mobility; it's about immobility. And we have been so persuasive, we've managed to get everyone terrified of falling, so they just stay in bed and they just lie on the floor and things like that. And this, for those of you who haven't seen it, just came out last week. I started the weekend. It is really, really taken off everywhere I've seen it. And it's an extraordinary piece of work done. And this is really at the heart of this session, is the looking at the impact of NPJ paralysis intervention. They were the first in Canada, in Alberta, to pick up the baton, in Calgary particularly, um, with Elizabeth Henderson, who is, I think she's a speech therapist by background, and others, Paul Wright as well. So they did this, and I love the fact they've got a sample size of 32,884 patients. So you've got a pretty robust piece of work. But as you can see down the bottom, where they implemented NPJ paralysis, and remember, it doesn't matter whether it's get up, get dressed, get moving, whether it's whatever it's called, doesn't matter. What does matter is the interventions. And where they saw these things, they had a reduction of length of stay of 1.8 days. That in England would translate to you not having ambulances waiting in a car park to get people into ED. If you get the people out 2 days early, that is a huge at scale effect. 2.2 for fewer falls events. I learned at the conference today, actually, you could, for those who put in a claim against an organization for a fall, how much do you think those claims on average come to for the NHS? How much does the NHS pay on average per fall where compensation is sought? Just pop it into the chat box, if you will. How much do you think per fall, when people see when it fall coming to harm, and then the organization, the trust, is taken to court? How much do you think is paid out? You are absolutely welcome to guess, because that's what we were doing yesterday. Do I detect a hesitancy? So it's per person. So 500 million per altogether will be 10,000 per fall, 15,000 per fall. It's like a Dutch auction. Combined, Juliet, yes. Well, Juliet's closest. It's actually £23,000 per fall, and I'm with Rebecca and Suzanne and Sarah, and I would have said 10 to 15 grand. 23,000, and if I recall correctly, I think they've in Sheffield they've reduced, sorry, not pun intended at all. They've reduced the number of falls by something like 39%. So they're having around 400 falls a year. If even 10% of those were ending up in court or for a claim, you're looking at 2.3 million falls. So I don't know, but do beg your pardon. It's 10% of 400 would be 40 times 23. So you're looking to go to £1 million. So it's extraordinary amount. So here's the thing. Look at Alberta, so you made it. Oh, by the way, more people go back home to their home, not to care homes. And also the evidence showed if you mobilize people, there's fewer falls. So you think, oh my God, they made it. The really, really important point in this paper, and I'm happy to share, it's open access, but anyone who wants it, I'm really happy to share it, is this. When they stopped doing it in the various hospitals, it ran out of steam, or people got, they were doing some of this through COVID, the performance went backwards. So even when you get the evidence, it reduces falls, it reduces length of stay, it reduces harm, unless you embed it culturally as business as usual, this is who we are, this is what we do, you end up going backwards. So once you think you've made it, actually all you've done is you've got to not the ceiling, you've got to the floor. The work then is saying, how do you stay on the floor and not treat it as a ceiling? Getting to number one, as any tennis or anyone in sports will tell you, getting to number one is hard. Staying at number one, that is what's really, really hard. And if you look at this shadow, this is K2. Shadow of K2 is the second highest mountain in the world. And the thing with K2, it's quite remote. It's near the Chinese border. It's hard to get to. And there's only been a couple of hundred have climbed it. The interesting bit, I'm thinking about, is that until quite recently, the mortality rate on this mountain, the climbers, was around 25%. But here's the interesting bit. 90% of those who died did so on the way down. And I think that's a metaphor in a sense for change because you get to the peak. By the way, the 90% were mainly the people who summited, who actually got to the top. So people who get to the top, they think, yeah, we've made it, we're safe, we can go down now, we've done it. And actually, those are the ones who, sadly, at the cost of their lives. And it's about a metaphor for it's hard to stay up there, but if you are going down, it's being important to not take a big tumble as a result. And every one of us have seen patients who they're doing so well, and then they kind of fall off the wagon. And actually, it's really hard because actually they've gone back further than they had done. Oh, thank you, Julie, for sharing that one, Julia. Thank you. So the thing is, again, I have to declare, Suzanne's husband, the brilliant ED doctor, Dr. Ben Owens, and he says there is no risk, there's no safer, there's simply lower risk, and there is safer. And the same way, if you ever hear somebody say, I'm not happy for this patient to be discharged, remind them it's not about our happiness. It is about the patient and their family's appetite for risk. And there's a great lawyer, Roy Liddy, I recommend to you his blog. He writes 2 or 3 times a week, hundreds, tens of thousands of followers. Very, very astute. But he always talks about start with the patient and work backwards because too often we start with the physio service, we start with the nursing services, we start with the what have we got that we can offer instead of starting with the patient and working backwards to what it is they need. And if there is one early safe discharge, doesn't benefit that patient, it benefits 5 patients each time. Because it benefits the patient who's been discharged from that unit. It's patients who's been transferred to a ward for an acute medical assessment unit, the patient waiting to be transferred from the AMU from ED, the patient who's waiting in the ambulance outside the emergency department, and the patient waiting in the community waiting for an ambulance. I know we began speaking to somebody who a loved one had waited hours in a community, actually following a fall because there was no ambulances available. So in your work, if you are in clinical practice, it's reminding that actually we have a huge ripple effect impact on the people we care for. But when you start out, it's not a hill, it's a mountain when you start out to climb. It's a lot of slow, hard work and slow momentum. But then you get to that tipping point and then it gets easier. And then if you hit it, at least you got some momentum as you go behind you. And that's the thing that starts to make a difference for people. But what's important is the why is this important? Is the understanding the why, not the what, not the how, but the why, because the why builds engagement and cooperation. Why? Because we're valuing patients' time. Why? Because 48% of people over the age of 85 will die within 1 year of admission. Why? Because a third of medical patients are in their last year of life. Why is it important that we take informed risks about this patient? Because when we take no risks, our patients take all the risks. And when people, as Nietzsche would have said, have got a great why, they will put up with any what. So when you're looking to engage people, try and spend time finding out what matters to them, because you can make it and sustain it if people are connected to a strong sense of purpose. Best example I often give is a 7-word tweet, which is the most powerful of the 21st century, by Zelensky when immediately after the Russians invaded Ukraine. And back channels were that the Americans were prepared to whisk him and his family away. And he sent a tweet out that says, I don't need a ride, I need ammo. And that tweet galvanized the whole nation to a point where the Russians can spend as many decades as they want, but the Ukrainians will never, ever give up. And now it's no longer about Zelensky. It's about their sense of the existential identity of who they are. They have their great why. But it's also important to note if you're in a leadership role that the leadership style impacts the motivations of employees, whether for good or for bad. And studies show that roughly 70% of a team's performance is a direct reflection of the leader's effort, not only to understand employees and to match their style to that employee's needs and goals. Best example is Alex Ferguson. He was really clear. They had the why, what they were trying to achieve, but how he managed David Beckham, how he managed Rooney, the really quiet Paul Scholes defender. He managed them, he understood them. He matched his leadership style to their needs and their goals. And that's why Man United were so very successful and haven't really been since. You know, about 1 in 8 people, they don't leave their job, they leave their manager. Leadership matters. And leaders set the tone, managers carry the culture, but peers drive belonging. And if you want culture change that's successful, start with the hearts. It's hearts and minds in that order. And that's the stories, the whys it matter. The strategy, we need the evidence, we need the data, we need to have the context and the plans. That's the what and the how. And then the hands, and political parties are actually very, very good at this. If somebody wants interested, they think this is what's important to them and they believe in that, they'll say, great, you want to join us? Here's leaflets, go knocking on doors. So they give them something to do. And I think it's an important part of democracy, but they are very, very good at it. So if you get somebody coming to you and says, I really like this thing, how can I help? I'd like to help. Have something for them to do, because then they become more emotionally engaged in it than ever. But culture change doesn't happen just because you want it to. Culture change happens when behavior and everyday realities change for individuals. That's where culture change occurs. But the most important thing is to focus on the things you can do stuff about. There's no point in putting your energy into things you can't. It's not only a waste of energy, it's also an absolution from the things you can do stuff about. And very often people say, oh, if it's only for the beds, if it's only for this, it was only changing government, it was only for actually that's pointless. It's a waste of emotional energy and time. The trick to make stuff succeed is to focus on the bits you can do and explore what's possible in that space. The shared purpose of NPJ paralysis, the work that brilliant Helen Bevan did. Our patients, our families, our nurses, our doctors, our leaders, our healthcare assistants, our anger and outrage that older people deteriorate when we could do something about it. And our purpose is to make sure every person in a hospital bed gets mobilized when they're ready clinically, but also really importantly, when they are personally ready, they want to, because they can say no and they should. So they should have that choice and a chance for the future they want. That I think helps galvanize the whole point of what NPJ paralysis is about. But as ever, we under communicate. We think we've communicated. I sent an email, I called a meeting. You have to do it again because you stick with it, you think about it. The people you work with, it's not one of the things on their radar. So you have to circle back again and again to do so. And things fall over, I think, because it's not understood. The questions are, they don't mean resistance. It means people are processing why it's important and what does it mean for them. And we underestimate how much fear plays in resistance. What if I get it wrong? What about my registration? What about my team? What about my patients? What about my colleagues? What about, where I stand with the team? And it's never necessarily articulated, but it's a really important part of why people are saying, asking questions. And it doesn't mean resistance. And it's important to give people permission to change things for themselves. And a successful organization is high on trust and low on bureaucracy, but organizations only succeed at the speed of trust. And that takes time. You've seen these stuff. In fact, what I'm going to do, it's 8:16. I'm kind of going to stop, I think, at that point in order to open the conversation up for anyone who wants to open conversations, chat, questions, heckles on the back of a £10 note, whatever a £10 note is. So is it okay if I kind of stop there? Are you okay with that, Verity and Leanne? That's a big thumbs up. So let's open it up for conversation. So it's not me, standing outside shouting at the clouds as I usually do of an evening. Any comments, observations, thoughts? Gosh, there's lots of you here. Welcome. Do chip in. I don't know how we do this on Zoom so that everyone can join hands and contact the living, but do please come and join us. How many of you have been involved? You can put stuff in the chat, or if you want to put your hand up, and then we can bring you in. How many of you have been involved in a change effort that failed? This hand's going up.
Definitely. Continually, actually. But that doesn't stop the motivation, does it? Just keep going,
Yeah, it's an important point. There's a slide I've got about hopeful thinking, and hopeful thinking is that the future can be better. That I could do something about it. I'd see my power to do so. There's many opportunities to make it better, and none of them are free of obstacles. And that's what hopeful thinking is. And it's not. It's was it Mandela? It's not how often you get knocked over. It's how often you're willing to stand up again. And one thing that's often missed about Olympians, they hate training and pianists and all these. They hate it as much as we do. Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time. Inside he used to go to bed. He had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do swimming, and he'd wear his swimming cap to bed. And inside his swimming cap, he'd written Beijing 2008, and that was what kept him motivated. So, any other thoughts and comments? Hopefully setting up exercise intervention within PCN, hoping you'll be saying really challenging. Oh, fair play, Sue. And do pop in if you would like to open up to tell us more about this. And then I'll come to you, Joe. Sue, where are you? I know you're here somewhere. And maybe some people can't talk for a whole bunch of reasons, got family around you, stuff like that. But that'd be really cool to see that.
Hi,
Oh, there, hello,
sorry.
lovely. That's
Can you
good.
hear me? Yeah.
You can
Nice
indeed,
to
yeah,
meet
welcome.
you. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. It's always a fear of setting up new things and hoping that they'll be sustainable and managing that success, hopefully. But it's having that hope for the future, and how you avoid sort of that slippery slope of down that mountain, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think so great friend of mine, Dr. Deirdre Lang, she's a director of nursing for older people for the Republic of Ireland. And she talks about our future older selves. And I think sometimes we can get people engaged by reminding them this will be about all of us too. So we have a collective vested interest in making these services better for everyone. So no, good on you, Sue. And sometimes it just needs one person who's passionate, and then another, and then that's how change occurs. So it does, absolutely. Joe had been able to burn around early discharge so many times, struggle to get people discharged, and they deteriorate rapidly. So much harder to get them back to pre-admission status. 1 in 6 people who walked into hospital need a frame going out or a stick. So they leave hospital worse than they arrived. So yeah, and this notion. I don't think we should be ever talking about medically fit for discharge. I think it should be clinically fit for discharge, because as physiotherapists, your judgment may be that they might be medically fit, but actually they need a therapeutic input. And I think when you hear the language of medically fit, push back. That's one thing. And the second thing is it's a therapeutic window. And that window shuts some people if we don't get them out soon enough. And then they can end up with falls, they can end up with a UTI and all kinds of harm events The glass ceilings that make change and progression very challenging as leaders. We have to think more about supporting our colleagues if we feel restrained. Amy, you're the EDB lead for Agile. Do you want to come in on this point? And then I'll tell you a story about about Florence Nightingale.
Hi, Brian.
Hello, lovely.
Yes, sorry, I'm hiding behind my screen,
That's all good,
recovering
I'm glad.
cold. Yes, I suppose I hope glass ceilings is a familiar term. Well, I hope it isn't a familiar term to people. But yes, I suppose it just represents that there absolutely is, opportunity to progress and develop and make change, and it's just about how we break through that. And sometimes it can seem like it's incredibly challenging, but you can see beyond that ceiling, and it's just working out how you get to that point, which I think someone else commented about. They've been trying for 4 years to make change, and they finally got to that point. So they had the vision, and it's just working out how you get there, and as you've been saying, perseverance is often key to that.
Yeah, and then actually, Suzanne, do you want to come in on that point? Because know a little bit about this, but it'd be good to hear from you, because this is an inspirational story, I think, for others, our physio colleagues. You never gave up. I'm not sure you can, if you're able to speak or not, Suzanne. Lots of love, by the way, to that comment. So, but there is, in case of Suzanne Carter, it's important to not give up, and the glass ceiling is just something you don't have to deal with it. What you do is you bring a tool. So Florence Nightingale, you all know that Florence was known as the lady with a lamp. Well, actually, it just wasn't true. That was an image made up by the Times. Who knew? Journalist tells lies, shock. Locally in Scutari in the Crimea, Florence was known as the lady with the hammer, because when she arrived in Scutari, she discovered that the officers were given medication and pain relief, but the men, the ranks, were not. And that outraged her. So she went to the drug cupboard with a hammer, broke in, and enabled to pay these guys. So she was known as the lady with the hammer. And I was saying today at this conference, what would the world be like if we had a woman known as Florence Nightingale, the lady with the hammer? What would have that done to the glass ceiling? What would it done for feminism? What would it done for women if we had that story told, rather than this, well, we have to keep this Victorian faculty safe, and nursing has to be supplicants to medicine, it has to keep know its place. What stories would we tell? Justine, let's bring you in. Calling Justine. Hello, lovely.
Hi. Thank you so much for a brilliant talk.
Bless you.
I've had this saying because colleagues have asked about the glass ceilings and the obstacles and the lack of seats on tables. I've had this saying that I think is interesting, that ask for forgiveness, not for permission. What do you think about that? Because I have a feeling, or I think it's evident, that sometimes there's a lot of bureaucracy and lots of hoops to jump, and sometimes some of the people you're talking to, I don't know, they might not see where you're going, but again, they might have justifications. Oh, we don't have funding, but then suddenly funding can appear for other things. So I had an experience where I did something. So being new to a system helps, but also it doesn't help, because I thought of an idea and I just did it, and then I got smacked on the wrist for doing it, and it nearly broke my spirit. But again, if I had waited, thinking about it, if I had talked to all these, that whole stakeholder engagement, I plan meeting after meeting, and some things are urgent, they need to be dealt with. So what are your thoughts on this? Have you dealt with it? Have you practiced it? Asked for forgiveness rather than permission?
Yep, and there's a couple of things in there. I mean, Suzanne made the point, Beverly Harden told us not to wait for a seat at the table, pull up a chair. And the other thing is I would suggest is this, if that's not working, just build a different table. Um, as an exec director, what I would often find is people would come and ask, how do you feel about it? And I'm saying, but of course you have permission. If you think about healthcare, it's very, very hierarchical. He was born in the church, raised in the army. We've got a linguistic heritage of medical and nursing officers. We have staff nurse from staff sergeant, auxiliary and old name for HCAs. We've got sisters, the ecclesiastical bits. So there's that bit of it, that linguistic heritage shapes how we behave in the workforce. The other bit around it, though, is as execs, we would assume people had the permission, but they didn't know they had permission. And part of my job was really to be director of permission giving. But what was always great was learning when people would come to say, so we did this. And you're going, oh, that's brilliant. Because clinicians will have thought really, really, really hard about stuff. You're not going to have a clinician going off saying, I decided to set up a burr service for people with migraines. They wouldn't do that, What I also think ties into this is you look at what Derek Laidler has done. He just got on and something like 70% of the patients, so there's been a 70% reduction in the number of patients seeing the orthopods because they now just see the physios first. He figured if he went around and did a stakeholder, did this, that, and the other, it would never happen. He just got on with it. And then the service manager said, oh my God, this is brilliant. The orthopod said, oh my God, this is brilliant. So he just got on with it. And I think when you have something, now I'm not just saying what I'm suggesting is you can all just go, ride like the Wild West. Because the other bit of all this mix is get allies around you, people who think, because you want people you can test your ideas with. You want people to say, is it me or what do you think? And you can find quickly those people say, oh my God, it's brilliant. And what you think is an idea that is simple, I'm thinking that deserves a Nobel Prize. Where it ties into budgets, this is a tricky one because none of us would run our household budget and say, oh my God, we've got money left on the 31st of March, we need to spend it all. And that's how health too often works, doesn't it? So, and I think it's an enduring issue. It's government driven. I gathered today the CPD money for the NHS has not yet been released, and it's probably now because we're in Purda, because of the local elections in England, it probably won't be released until after next week. So people are desperately trying to get things started, but they can't because the budgets aren't available yet. They don't know what they're getting. It is a bonkers way, and it applies as readily in academia, as you would know too well, Juliet, as it does for us. And that's why you end up with these 1 to 2 year funded projects. And the reason I would, I'm a recovering academic, is my funding as an academic, as a research fellow, was constantly funded all the time by me actually having to raise money for my own job. And that's kind of why I kind of went out and just, we did our own thing after that. So being mindful of all of these bits, but just do what you think is right at the time. Trust yourself. Remember, most of you are really senior clinicians. One of the brilliant bits about our medical colleagues, if they think there's the right thing to do, they get on and do it, and we need to laud them for that confidence. And if all else fails, you can blame me. So, I'm not sure if we've got to everyone getting EDDM on the wards, like where I'm being informed. We tried this and didn't work. Right, good point. Because I'm conscious it's 8:30 and it's not a child in the house wash. Getting a dress drink move on the wards when it didn't work. Sometimes things fail, and that's okay. And then they fail again, and that's okay. Sometimes it's about timing. We have known about the original deconditioning, the JAMA paper, Emile Rees et al. Back in 1899. Deconditioning paper by, The Dangers of Going to Bed, 1947. John Power, 1944. There's a paper in the American Journal of Nursing from 1967. But the last 6 years, I think now, say 8 years, 2016, Dr. Amit Arora and myself in parallel came up with the Get Up, Get Dressed, Get Moving, NPJ paralysis campaigns. And the timing is right. The NPJ paralysis paper that was published last week, I think will further galvanize it. So what I would suggest later is use that paper and put it onto people and say, maybe it didn't work then, but now there's even greater urgency. Now we can see it work. Timing is everything. Betamax was a better, if anyone remembers those, Betamax was better than VHS. There was Blu-ray, and I can't remember the other thing. It's not always about the technology, it's about the timing, it's about a bunch of other things. There was a guy who set up, he had 100 companies, 100 he made, he's a serial entrepreneur, and he wanted to study why did some succeed and some fail. He set up an early version of YouTube, but the problem was in the US at that point, they had dial-up. The guys who created YouTube had got YouTube at the time that broadband was coming into America. So your timing is everything. And the other big bit he found is a key bit is trust. Where you have trust. So the guys with Google, they didn't have a business plan. They were just two mates from where were they? Harvard or one of them, MIT. They really trusted each other. So when you have, and that's why organizations succeed at the speed of trust, because papers and evidence, it's never quite enough. It bolsters. It's not the driver of the biggest change. It's all about feelings, more than it's about facts. But when you get feelings and facts working together, and when you get confident people who so know that this is the right thing to do, that's when the world changes. Martin Luther King may have talked about his dream, but behind him, he had operations people, he had logistics people, getting the trains to Washington, getting enough water for people to drink on that hot summer's day. So it's not about who's the front person, it's about the collective working with each other to make it better and make it stick. It's 20:33. I apologize for going a few minutes over. Back to you, Rianne and Verity.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you for such a great talk, as always. I always leave any of your talks feeling very inspired and motivated to go on. And I think what you said about, only worry about the things that you control, that's something I'm definitely going to kind of take with me this evening. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And we hope we'll end the recording there.